psychology major. She's going to graduate in the spring of 24. She's going to tell us about the degradation of social dynamics, the long-term impacts of isolation during the COVID-19 pandemic on psychological well-being.
All right, thank you, Dr. Minus. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending the McNair Summer Research Symposium of 2023. Like Dr. Minus said, my name is M.Dean. I am a psychology major graduating in 2024. Woo, right around the corner. And today I will be discussing my research examining the long-term impacts of isolation during the COVID-19 pandemic on psychological well-being. Oh, I think I didn't turn this on. Okay, there you go. Alrighty, so to begin, as you all may know, COVID-19 resulted in a dramatic change in how society interacts and functions. There was the outbreak of the virus, the mandatory lockdowns that were ordered, along with social distancing and quarantines to prevent transmission. And in return, many people experienced social isolation as a result of face-to-face communication decreasing. However, the degree of isolation perceived can differ in experience. Although some experience the same degree of isolation, the experience of isolation itself can vary. And as a result of the pandemic, many people face psychological consequences of social isolation and quarantine. In regards to the psychological issues during COVID-19, a study was conducted to examine the psychological outcomes seen during the initial outbreak of the pandemic, and researchers found that depression, anxiety, fatigue, and post-traumatic stress disorder were present in the acute stage of COVID-19, and additionally, insomnia, emotional lability, irritability, and pressured speech was also found present as a consequence of COVID-19 post-recovery. However, the impairment of social functioning was found to be a greater effect on mental health in comparison to the other factors. And research shows that there are psychological consequences of social isolation and quarantine. A systematic review was conducted and it examined the public health consequences of social isolation and loneliness. And the findings suggest that there is a strong association between social isolation and loneliness with poor mental and cardiovascular health. Since social isolation was a result of quarantine, the psychological consequences of quarantine was also examined. And based on a study on the psychological impact of quarantine, including hospital staff participants, it was reported that exhaustion, detachment from others, anxiety, irritability, insomnia, poor concentration and indecisiveness, post-traumatic stress, and emotional disturbance was present during the quarantine of the staff. This leads to the research question of what the long-term impacts are of isolation during the COVID-19 pandemic on psychological well-being. So with that research question in mind, the hypothesis that individuals who perceived significant isolation during the COVID-19 pandemic will now demonstrate a decrease in psychological well-being was created. In regards to the procedure, a Qualtrics survey was conducted and participants were recruited through email and course announcements at the university, as well as ads and posts on social media such as Facebook and Instagram. Consent was given by the participants at the beginning of the survey and they were debriefed at the end and were given references to support services for mental health. And the psychological well-being scale developed by psychologist Carol D. Riff was also included in the survey. This scale was used to measure the psychological well-being of the participants. SPSS 27.0 data analysis software was used to run a one-way ANOVA, looking at the psychological well-being subscales and how they differed on degree of perceived isolation. And for all analyses, a p-value of less than 0.05 was deemed significant. To explain in further detail about the psychological well-being scale, the scale consists of 6 subscales used to measure well-being and happiness. So the first one, autonomy, measures the extent to which an individual is self-determined and independent. The environmental mastery subscale measures the extent to which one feels in control of their environment. The personal growth subscale measures the degree of perceived personal development. The positive relations with others subscale measures the degree of satisfaction and trust in relationships with others. The purpose in life subscale measures the extent to which one has a sense of direction in life. And lastly, the self-acceptance subscale measures the degree of self-satisfaction. With that being said, here are the demographics collected from the participants. There was a total of 178 participants, with 58.7% identifying as women, or a woman. 39.1% identified as male, and 2.2% was non-binary or genderqueer. Most participants were in the age range of 20 to 22, being about 37% of the total. 61% identified as Caucasian or white, with Hispanic or Latinx being the second majority at around 33%. In this sample, 86.5% reported experiencing social isolation during March 2020 through May 2021. Out of those who experienced social isolation, 11.2% rated their isolation as slight to mild, and 75.2% rated their isolation as moderate to significant. So as shown here, here is a graph that shows the results of the ANOVA, and for each subscale, the significant differences are highlighted by the asterisks, which shows that environmental mastery and positive relations with others had significant differences. The overall significant difference for environmental mastery was a p-value of 0.028, and the positive relations with others had an overall significant difference of 0.005. In regards to the post hoc pairwise comparisons, they show that those who rated their isolation as moderate to significant had significantly lower scores for environmental mastery, with a p-value of 0.022 and positive relations with others at a p-value of 0.003. Also, the total psychological well-being score for the overall was at a p-value of 0.023. Alrighty, so based on the results, the hypothesis that individuals who perceive significant isolation during the COVID-19 pandemic will now demonstrate a decrease in psychological well-being is supported. The total psychological well-being score was lower in those who experienced social isolation versus those who did not. For positive relations with others, people who perceive significant isolation had lower scores compared to those who didn't, and this could indicate that distrust with others and official information sources increased, as it was reported in a study done examining the impacts of quarantine and distress during COVID-19 on interpersonal relationships. As for environmental mastery, individuals who experience significant isolation also had lower scores, which suggests a lack of control. The threat of the virus and the restrictions ordered seemed to enforce the lack of control of one's own life, and it made it even more difficult for those who had already felt they had little control in their lives, and this was also accompanied by poor mental health. One limitation of the research was that the majority of the participants experienced significant isolation in comparison to those who did not. So that was 134 participants out of our total, which was 178. So this could have influenced our results definitely. Additionally, 61 of our participants did identify as Caucasian or white, which could have impacted the diversity of the study. In regards to future research, this study is an extension of a larger study focusing on the impacts of isolation during COVID-19 on social anxiety and social media dependency. One of the aims of the larger study is to specifically examine social anxiety following isolation of the pandemic. And research is also suggested towards examining the impact of external psychological factors relating to distress during COVID-19. This was based on the results in determining the psychological well-being scale out of these 6 subscales, the 2 subscales that were deemed significant were related to external factors that influence psychological well-being, so it would be interesting to look more into that one. And lastly, I wanted to mention that in regards to the larger study, attachment style will also be analyzed. And here are the references that I used to support my presentation today. And lastly, I would like to acknowledge the following. I would like to thank Dr. Emily Barton, my research director, for mentoring me and directing me throughout this summer research. She's been a great help. She's been one of my most favorite professors since my freshman year here. I would like to thank the McNair Scholars Program for giving me the opportunity and the funding to conduct my research. I would also like to thank Dr. Molly Midas, the director of the McNair Scholars Program, as well as Dora Bettis, which is also the assistant director. You two have given me so much support and knowledge this summer. Thank y'all so much. I would also like to thank my family, the Dean's family, for supporting me today and supporting me on all of my academic journey and pursuits. I wouldn't be in this position without you guys, so thank you for showing up today. I would also like to thank my fellow McNair scholars. This summer was intense, but we made it, and I'm so proud of every one of us. Lastly, I would like to give thanks to the Emma Lulin Research Award for providing additional funding for my research. And that is it. I'm now open to any questions. Thank you so much. Hey. The most difficult would probably have to be the data analyses. There were specific coding that I needed to do in regards to the scales and the questionnaire. And originally, I got the coding wrong, so I had to go back and redo that. So that was definitely probably the most complicated part of it.
So you mentioned significant isolation during COVID. How did you define significant?
Oh man, that's a great question. Originally, we wanted to have different degrees of isolation, and at first it was going to be slight, moderate, and then mild and significant, but then we realized that the definition of isolation was kind of like left open for interpretation, so we kind of wanted to limit that interpretation so much, not so where we can't measure it, but just something that will be a little bit more easy for the participant to recognize of their experience.
Oh yeah. Was there like any relationships or like differences between males and females?
That's a great question. Me and my research director, Dr. Emily Barton, we did want to see if there were any gender differences, but unfortunately we did not find any that were deemed significant, so I didn't include them in my research, although that is a great aspect to look into.
What do you think you might have done differently to try to find out about gender differences in your research questions? Is there anything you might have done differently in your survey that you might have been able to identify gender differences?
I think definitely including questionnaire or questions that relate to their gender identity rather than just asking questions of like trying to collect demographics. Just the scales and the questions that we use were kind of just directly geared towards well-being or social media or social anxiety, but if we had an extra questionnaire or an extra scale that would examine the gender identity, then I would probably add that one. Maybe on my next research.
We have a couple of minutes for any other questions.
Jessica.
How does this research contribute to your future aspirations?
Oh man, that is a great, I keep saying that. I guess y'all all have great questions. I really, as Skyden said, that most psychology majors are just interested in why do people do the things that they do, and I guess this really touched me most importantly just because we all experienced COVID, and when the COVID-19 pandemic, the initial outbreak is when I first started college. So I was like, man, I kind of had a little bit of a personal like agenda in a way, because as all you may know, freshman year for us was kind of hard. It was like a ghost town here. So yeah, I guess I do want to look into more just how social interactions in general and social interactions within like certain societies, especially just based off of like location as well. So yeah, what's up?
I have a follow-up question. Do you ever think that you'd be interested in researching like COVID cases, like COVID children?
Oh man. Yes, I would definitely be into looking into how COVID-19 impacted and influenced like how children development or just adolescent development. When I participated, or I was involved in an internship last semester, and I just kind of saw how the children are interacting and moving nowadays post-pandemic. So that would definitely be something I would love to check out. All right.